Hello, and welcome to the Net Zero Compare podcast. Today, I'm speaking with Henk Dearden, founder and executive director of ForestPlanet, a nonprofit organization that supports large-scale reforestation projects around the world by working with experienced local planting partners. Henk, thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
My pleasure. Tree planting is often presented as one of the simplest responsive to climate change. In practice, however, the quality of project depends on much more than number of seedlings placed in the ground, as I can imagine. Species selection, survival rates, land rights, local participation, or even, let's say, biodiversity, monitoring, and long-term maintenance all affect whether a project delivers meaningful results. For businesses and sustainability teams, this is also an increasingly important credibility issue. Companies may support reforestation as a part of their sustainability strategies, but they still need to understand what they are funding, what claims can reasonably make, and how tree planting fits alongside direct emissions reduction. So, Hank, before we examine the projects themselves, could you tell us about your professional background and what led you to establish Forest Planet? Was there a particular experience that convinced you that reforestation was an area where you could make a practical contribution?
Absolutely, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to do a quick background. So I have the degrees in math and engineering. I studied systems engineering. My life was involved with technical sales. The great thing about going to engineering school when you're young is learning that you're not a good engineer, but you shouldn't do that. But I understand it, and I appreciate technology. And what was needed was marketing and sales and delivery, and more of a communications role for a lot of high-end tech stuff that I was involved with, speech recognition, semiconductors, and even in the internet stuff in the early 90s. It was more of a consultative sale. You had to sort of explain the concept, not just the product. And I really enjoy talking with customers and users of technology um, to communicate the benefits and all that. In the back of my mind, I always had kind of like a green proclivity, if you will. It's genetic. My grandfathers were both into farming and whatever, and my grandfather was born in the Oklahoma Territory here in the United States before it was a state. So he was born on a cattle farm back in the day. Love trees, love growing trees forever, and I think I got that gene. Fast forward to 2002, I bumped into a nonprofit that was doing tree planting, but taking a more systems approach about we're not just putting trees in the ground. There's method to the madness, as it were, where we're going to put these species in proximity with those species, and we're going to do ground crops, and we're going to add bees, and we're going to graft flowers or whatever. It's going to be an integrated system. And like bing, bang, bang, it all went off. I go, that's exactly what I studied in college was systems theory and levels and rates and the interconnectedness of complicated things and whether the complicated thing is a machine, a building, a city, an economy, or an ecology. There's universals to how things work, right? And so I guess what I had studied was the ability to look at big, long, big complicated things and break them into small constituent parts and understand, how the interconnected works and also find what I call highly leverageable points or fulcrum points where a little bit of tweak here, a little bit of oil there, a little bit of this or that. Um, it manifests, it multiplies throughout the whole system. Um, so when he started talking about what they were doing, just all the lights went off. And I was like, yeah, I know what you're talking about. And then, yes, I understand that if you're looking at a lot of ecological systems or even socioeconomic systems, quite frankly, if you start pulling a thread on any particular problem, you're going to bump into deforestation pretty quickly. Sometimes it's immediate and sometimes it's a couple of levels removed. And then it just sort of dawned on me then and there that you get the most bang for buck when you put trees back. Now they have to be the right trees in the right place at the right time and in the right manner with the right agenda. But when you're working in the developing world specifically, the cost is insanely small. So the cost benefit ratio of the bang for the buck, so to speak, goes way up. Um, So I actually, with that organization, I ended up being a board member. I was a vendor. I was even in and out as the COO. Long story short, soap opera, blah blah blah. I left that organization, and but I really really liked the mission. And then it dawned on me, or actually everybody was like saying, Hank, you were basically running that one for a while. Why don't you start your own? And I was like, well, I really can't do that because I really don't have the program experience. I did not study agroforestry. I can't identify 60 species of tree. Um, but they were like, but you understand the business side and you can raise money. And when you raise money, just sub it out to people who know what they're doing. And that way you can stay more flexible. And I was like, no, I can't do that. And I realized, actually, yes, I can. That's a better model because it's more flexible. So ForestPlanet was launched in 2017, and it's really kind of boils down to I do what I do, and my tree planting partners or TPPs do what they do. We meet in the middle. I'm their sales guy. So uh, I go to events, I raise money, I raise awareness, I do this. And when it comes time to plant the tree, I write a check and then I visit and I follow up. Because in all these instances, these are homegrown organizations that I do vet. I use a third party organization, does a background check and the bad actor check and all that kind of stuff, and make sure my cash is not going to some wholly inappropriate and nefarious organization. And that's a nightmare. Um, so they do what they do, and in 99.9 times out of 100, they know what they need and they know how to do it. They just need more cash. So that's simple.
Exactly.
It's really that simple. And the Western dollar goes really far. So I'm like, okay, this is what you need. Hold that thought. I'll go get the money. Now you do have to convince me because I'm not I might be ignorant of the specifics, but I'm not stupid. You got to convince me that this project works because other projects liked it worked, and this is what I call the so frickin' what, or the SFW. Like, what's the point here? Why are we just planting trees because they're pretty? Now, what's the agenda here? And you have to convince me of all that. I'm like, okay, fine, got it. Well, hold that thought, and I'll go find the cash. So we work together very well in that regard. I think it was the Earth Justice or one of the other great NGOs out there, a bunch of lawyers on their team, and they're basically suing polluters, right? That's on their agenda. That's what they do, and more power to them. But their slogan was, or their logo or slogan or tagline, if you will, was because the earth needs a good lawyer. And that's true. But also what the earth needs is a good sales guy. Just sort of like, this is fast, it's affordable, it's effective, and it's working, and it's a good story in a whole universe of very bad stories that I'm not going to repeat because you've heard them plenty of times. I'm here to sell success. I'm here to sell hope. I'm here to put this all together and, organize the machinery, if you will, the systems that make all these things happen and deliver the results that are intended. So, hopefully that's enough background.
Almost like every large, well-run company, they always need a lawyer and a good salesperson. So almost the same.
No, I mean, people say, well, this is a great water bottle. It sells itself. Nothing sells itself.
No,
You know,
you always need the salesperson.
someone's got to go and knock on the door and basically communicate the value proposition, et cetera, et cetera. So it's always going to be needed. Yes, sir.
Exactly. Thank you very much for sharing the background. I think that provides useful context for how Forest Planet developed. So let's look more closely at the operating model you chose. Because Forest Planet does not appear to operate as a conventional tree planting contractor. You identify and support established projects and local organizations that can plant at scale, if I understood correctly from checking the website. So if you could tell us, how does that model work in practice, from selecting a partner and transferring funding to confirming the planting has taken place?
Sure. So, I mean, you just got to first, finding the partners is just good old fashioned roll up your sleeves, gumshoe, start Googling around and then asking people. There's a great organization. It's a search engine called Ecosia, They're based in Europe, and they plant a tree for everyone. They're a really good organization. I admire them. Who do they support? Who do they sub out to? You know, and then I reach out to Kokoja and say, "Can you recommend these guys?" Right. So a lot of it is just good old fashioned intelligence gathering, and then talking to them, and then ask, and then getting them on the phone. A lot of people say, "Oh, you want to send us money? Sure, we'll talk." So they'll talk all day long. Um, and I'll ask a bunch of questions, and we'll go back and forth. And I said, okay, I have a third party organization called Charities Aid Foundation, CAF America. You're going to have to be vetted by them. It's going to cost a few $100, and we'll pay it. We at ForestPlanet will pay the money, but you're going to have to coordinate with them and give them your paperwork and cooperate. And they're like, fine. So basically securing my supply, if you will. So my my agenda there is to find people who know what they're doing, who are up and running, have been around for years, have nurseries, and that's the key. Um, do they know how to run a nursery really, really well? Because almost, I mean, I haven't seen it yet. It could happen, but almost any species you pick, you just don't take the seed and put it in the ground outside and so hope for the best. It's all about the nursery. You got to come back, and you have to be well run, because if the nurseries are well run, the seedlings that come out of them in 6, 9, 12 months or whatever it is, have a fighting chance, and usually survival rates are in the high 90s. uh, espe- uh, Especially when they outplant. That's the action verb. Take it from the nursery, put it in the field. Especially when they outplant at the right time, like usually right at the beginning of a rainy season, whatever it is in their area, and they prepared the field, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, these are all the questions that I'll ask. And so my agenda when finding the tree planting partners was not looking in a particular country. It was looking for the program, right? Yeah, that knew what they were doing. Um, I didn't really care. And then, what's the price? And also, and this is something that they had to sort of communicate to me, what are the attendant economic benefits and barriers to destruction, if you will, uh, that's being afforded? Okay, you're planting these trees and they're pretty and they're going to have all this ecological benefit, and that's fine. But how does that affect the local economics? How does this deter people from cutting down the trees? How are they benefiting? What's the SFW, in the economics of that? And that's where like sort of my business background comes in too. And I spent a lot of time focusing on the economics, because if you can definitely clearly communicate that we're going to do an ecological thing and it has economic benefit, the economic benefit acts as a protective barrier against someone taking down the trees. Because if all these different families and whole communities have economic, I mean, they're tied to the success of the program, that I don't have to show up with armed guards for the trees, right? It just taps into the natural proclivity of the community to protect its own self-interest. So that's the key too, because again, it's economics, ecology, same eco Greek root means home. That's not that's not that's not an accident for those two. So those are the questions that I'll ask. And they could be in Asia, they could be in the Americas, they could be in Africa. The first projects I am supporting are in Africa, Morocco, Tanzania. For a while, it was Madagascar. I'm not working with that team anymore. But right now, I mean, there's a program in Iceland I'd love to support. I got emails from Iraq, Pakistan, South America. If I had $1 billion, I'd say yes to everyone. And then I would. And that's the agenda. That's my goal. Quite frankly, that's my big, hairy, audacious goal. $1 billion bucks a year, and sort of dole it out across to below the radar organizations. So I could say it's at one point, hopefully in the future, that the sun never sets on ForestPlanet, because we're supporting projects everywhere around the planet, 24/7. That's our goal.
I'm curious, have you accomplished any projects in Poland? I'm asking because originally I'm from Poland.
Possibly, yeah. Look, the answer is there a good project already working there? I don't have the expertise to spin one up, right? And that's very capital intensive. right? Creating the nurseries and hiring the people and all that other kind of stuff, right? I mean, I can get it, I can track it, I could do it, but that's not really what I'm here for, right? If there's a program in Poland, in Hungary, in wherever that's up and running and doing a good job and has track history and has experience and has good relationships with the community and checks all the boxes, so to speak, then I would consider funding them if I had the money, right? So
Exactly.
that's I hope that answers the question. That again, I don't look for the country, I look for the program.
Got it. So your role involves both directing funding and evaluating organizations carrying out the work.
Yep.
So that raises an important question about the project selection, obviously. So when you assess a potential project, if you could tell us what factors matter most. For example, how do you weigh ecological needs, soil degradation, biodiversity, community benefits, planting capacity, costs, the likelihood that the trees will survive, and probably the list goes on and on.
Yeah, it really is, and it's like again, what's the agenda of this particular project? And again, people come to me with them, right? So we want to put some mangroves back in this one area that been clear cut and degraded by the local community. Okay, why? Well, it's a fishing community. Okay, why are they cutting down the mangrove trees? Well, because they need the cash. Well, why do they need the cash? Well, because fish populations are down 80% in 20 years. So there's a lot of economic stress. Do people realize that fish are born in the root systems of the mangrove trees? And by cutting them down, yes, they do, but they have short-term needs. I'm like, okay, well, first, convince me and let me talk to the village elders or whomever that there's now like a neighborhood watch group that won't clear cut trees if we put them back. And yes, and it's all this kind of sit down and kumbaya. And yes, they do need the wood, but and you can harvest, a limb here, a limb there. That's okay. It really is. You can harvest it, just don't clear cut. So now there's like, okay, there's a community watch group that's not going to clear cut. Okay, now how do we put them back? And that's where we try a couple of things and a couple of them fail because mangroves are very tricky. And maybe this is a new project for some of them, but for others, it's not. And we crack the code, we figure it out. And now we have nurseries growing healthy mangrove trees to the tune of 1 to 400,000 of them at a given time and going into these fields. Um, so that's like an immediate thing. The good news there is that where we've put back, roughly, actually, we just sent money to get another 200,000 seedlings started, right? And the good thing about mangrove seedlings is that there's no time limit for about how long they can stay in the nursery. Some nurseries, you got to get the trees out before they get too root bound and all that kind of stuff. But so there's a shelf life. So there's pressure to get them out to the field. The great thing with mangroves is that they're kind of planted in mud, so if the root systems go down, they're easily pulled out of the mud, and you got to be gentle about it, but it doesn't damage them. And the longer they stay in the nursery, the healthier they are, and then the higher the survival rates when they're outplanted. But the bigger picture, and this sort of gets into one of your recent chats about sustainability, marketing, and all that other kind of stuff, is carbon markets. Okay. Now,
Exactly.
one of the reasons people give me money to plant trees for multiple reasons, right? Heretofore, none of them have been for carbon credits, right? In their mind, a business says, okay, we want to plant a tree for every water bottle we sell or whatever because it sequesters carbon. I'm like, fine, but we're not a carbon scheme, and I'm not going to give you a rigorous carbon accounting. And I'm kind of iffy on if that's possible anyway, and that's another discussion. Carbon's not why the trees get planted. A lot of times carbon and global cooling is why people donate, right? So I gotta like sort of say yes, kind of like the old classic yes and. Yes, I'm planting a bunch of trees. Yes, they will sequester carbon. How much? I'm not sure. Are you going to get carbon credits for this? No. because it's not a rigorous carbon scheme, and I haven't registered it and all that kind of stuff with Vera and blah, blah, blah. But will it help cool the planet a little bit? Sure. Yeah, it'll help. Uh, but, and more, now the local community really benefits because now you're putting the trees back that are holding the soil. And then the root systems for each tree is like a little nursery for everything at the bottom of the marine food chain that will help with this 80% reduction in fish populations. Will it magically solve that problem? Probably not. Will it help? Yes. Right. That's why the trees get planted. So it's like matching up the expectations and the goals, and then the reality of what the needs are on the ground. So that's the other part of the challenge. So I'm sorry. Did that answer your
Yeah, yeah,
question?
go ahead. Yes, I was also thinking if you could walk us through a real project, let's say the biggest one or the most interesting, and explain why ForestPlanet decided to support it. Would it be the Mangrove project that you've been describing?
Yeah, I think it would be. And I'm sorry, having said all that about carbon markets, I'm optimistic that they can help us. So there's short-term tactical benefits for doing mangroves, and mangroves are the most important tree on the planet, as far as I'm concerned. But where we've planted 600,000 trees, there's room for like 8 million, right? It took me a long time to raise the money to get that planted, right? So now what I am starting to do is work with carbon developers saying, listen, we've de-risked this carbon project. Mangroves are tricky. I mean, they only grow in particular areas, but the blue carbon credits are pretty valuable, right? In terms of the current markets. So when I go to the developer and I say, listen, I've got I've got 2 teams on the ground. I've got the maps. We've got some of the permissions. We'll need more. It's government land. We've got permissions to plant, et cetera, et cetera. And I've already built, come see what we've already done. Right. And one actually did. They sent their guy and he went out and he saw the trees that we had outplanted and how healthy they were. And that's actually with not a lot of maintenance, because I'm a bare bones organization. When I go to a company and say, hey, it's 15 cents a tree to plant the tree, that's it. The tree gets planted. If you want me to sort of care and feed it for 3 years, that's 10 times as expensive. Right. But what I'm seeing I can do here is like use that initial 15 cents as highly leveraged and a catalyst to get something going. So a brand can say, yeah, we planted the tree, but we kickstarted this process where Hank and ForestPlanet and their friends have validated a planting site. And now the carbon investor developer folk will come in and say, okay, well, we see how this can scale, and here's a check to get 6 million trees planted, ready to go, right? Because here's where we'd put the nursery, and this is where they would go, and here's the permissions, and here's the people, and this is how they get there, and this is what they eat for lunch, and this is the road, and literally, I mean, you got to sort of boil this down to just what do people do when they get up in the morning and they go help to make this all happen, and how are you going to get paid, and how much are they going to get paid, and what's the going rate, and da da da, and all this can go into a pretty rigorous spreadsheet and say, listen, you, Mr. Investor, can feel confident about this or feel this has been de-risked because I've spent already, hundreds of thousands of dollars, the first part of which was doing the wrong thing, right? And failing. So you don't have to. So we're up the learning curve on my dime, right? As a 501c3. And yes, my donors, I go back to them and I say, thank you for donating. We planted the trees. And this group over here, they died because we messed up. I'm sorry, but thank you. Your donation was important. You can say you planted the trees, and we moved up the learning curve, and now they're not dying, right? I'm just straight up with everybody, in that regard. I mean, there's no need to sugarcoat it. But so now I get huge leverage, right? And carbon market people roughly will pay $1.50, depending on whatever, upfront to get the tree started, get the nursery built, get it out planted, and someone monitor it for 3 years before the carbon credits kick in, right? So they basically have to pay for the first 3 years of life. And then I could also say, listen, I've got 400,000 that were planted a couple of years ago. You can start to monetize those now. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to do the whole carbon credit, monetization, but it's money on the table if you want to start there, just to start showing some return and some revenue generated from the work that's already done. And then, of course, by law, and depending on the country, in Tanzania, it's something like 60% of that revenue needs to go back to the community. So we'll have to create an LLC and get the village elders and whoever on it. It's not going to go back to ForestPlanet. That's verboten. And what are we going to do with the money? Are we going to put solar on everybody's house? Are we going to buy a whole bunch of high efficiency cook stoves that require half the amount of wood to to cook your dinner and cook your meals? So that all of this relieves pressure on the forest. So people cutting down forests for wood, can go down. Every time I give a cook stove out, that's just that much less wood that's going to be pulled out of and we've already done that. We raised money, we got a grant, and we gave about 60 cook stoves, and I went through and I talked to them and I recorded all, and every single one of them, I mean, yeah, their wood consumption is down 20 to 80%. It's insane. So things like that can go back, and then rinse repeat. And now you're getting in. Now you look at the whole thing as a system, and now you get what they call it as a positive feedback loop, or a reinforcing feedback loop, that people have income. There's less pressure on the forest. Um, more fish are coming back, et cetera, et cetera. And then maybe there's plenty of other reasons why the fish populations are down. Okay, now you have some money to study those, right? What's involved with that? Can we build another nursery over here? I don't know anything about fish, but the locals do. So, but money is freedom if it's done right, and freedom to do. In my mind, you can do it.
I was just about to say that exactly. It opens up so many different opportunities.
Yes, it does, and it'll require the community consensus. I mean, there are schools, there's churches, there's mosques in this community, but the power comes in and out all day long, right? So I need electric generators and I need solar arrays, right? I need all these stuff, right? So people can go to school and whatever. So they need it. Sorry, they need it. But and the other one, just to get into, not to bang on too much about this, is again, but this gets back into tying economic realities back to the health of the forest. Beehives are a thing, right? I'm sorry, this guy's barking at me. And you there's cooperatives where there's maybe 3 or 4 families, and they've got 15 beehives. They put the beehives into the mangrove trees, the mature ones, which do flower, right? And they make this really dark, amazing, almost a molasses type of honey. It's like the real deal. I mean, you haven't had real honey. It's like this is African honey.
Never tried that one.
It's
Yet.
almost like molasses. It's unbelievable. It's just amazing. I would just put it straight on your pancakes and you're done. Um, but what we did is, again, we got another grant and we put another 50 of these beehives in. So like every, not even a tenth of a mile, maybe 20th a mile, you put them in, and then now you have multiple families whose income and livelihood is dependent on that tree not getting cut down, that tree not getting damaged. And it's like you build this economic cocoon around the ecological project, if that makes sense. So you can't have too many beehives. Plus, of course, bees deliver, well, all the benefits that bees deliver, on top of all that. And somebody else.
And as we know, their population is declining. So any measures to increase their population are beneficial for the whole planet.
It's a system. So you look at the whole
Exactly.
thing as a system, and it all works out pretty well.
I really appreciated those examples that you gave because I think they show why the location and local context can be and actually should be as important as the number of trees.
It's more
And the
important.
next,
Yeah,
or even more,
it's more important.
exactly.
Yeah.
And when I was going through your business profile and business model, I think the next issue is what happens after planting day. Because one of the main criticisms of pre planting campaigns is that organizations may report how many seedlings were planted without clearly reporting how many survived. So that's the problem. So, how do ForestPlanet and its partners approach maintenance, replacement, planting and survival monitoring?
So, I mean, like I said, I mean, we're at bare bones. I'm just going to be straight up. I tell this to my partners at all the time. And I said, what you're buying is a tree getting planted. If you want 3 years of maintenance, then you're going to add a couple of zeros to the cost. And a lot of people don't want to pay that, right? So, what what works though is if your program is well designed, monitoring and maintenance will kind of take care of itself, right? Because now the community's behind it, right? It's like if you're giving out coffee trees, you're giving those to farmers, right? They have a completely vested interest in making sure these trees live. I don't need to show up at their door every week and count their trees for them, right? If one died, it's because of other reasons, and it's the last thing the farmer wants. Um, the the one reality, the one time it was good. But then actually, so those are kind of like fruiting tree projects, which are separate from the mangrove tree projects. But I guess what I'm trying to say with the mangrove trees, when you're talking about the carbon, the monitoring, the maintenance can come from the carbon money, right? And that's what I'll design. Like this is going to stimulate your initial trees of 4, 6, 8 million. Say you planted 1 million mangroves and you got them going. That's not enough. We got to do the maintenance and all the things that you talked about. But that's where the carbon people will step in, right, and front that money. And then as the money comes in from the carbon credits, that money that goes to the community, sure, they're going to spend money on the solar and this and that. But the first thing I had to make this clear, the first thing that they have to spend money on is kind of like the police force that will, okay, you are now paid. This is your job to go monitor these trees and submit reports, take photos. And then actually within a few years, they do start showing up on satellites. So I've been to Tanzania 5 times, right? I've been to Morocco once. And, I've seen dead trees and I've seen a lot of trees survive where no one's even touched them for 7 months because they're planted where mangroves grow. And mangroves grow in tidal areas that are half the time underwater, right? So no one goes there, right? You can't build a house. You're not going to develop that land. So no one goes over unless it's specifically to go check up out on the trees. And people are busy. So I'll go and I'll go back and I'll see 95, 96% survival rates because they were planted the right way, right? And no one's touched them in 6 months, 6 or 7 months. So I don't mean to dodge the question. I mean, I'm monitoring and maintenance, but it's just being very clear and setting. Look, it's like any other product you're going to sell. You got to set expectations. This is what you're buying, and this is the catalyst, the system that'll go along. And if you want, like, I'm not going to put a barcode on every single tree. Satellite. If you want that, sure. Here's the price, right? A lot of times I got to haggle over the 15 cents, right? So it's a bare bones thing, but again, if it's done the right way, even a simple bare bones project can be highly leveraged and have a as I say, the point of an inverted pyramid. It can grow. So um, yeah, I mean, I will get photos from the field, and when I go back and visit, I've got whole albums with this brand, the other brand, the other brand. They're all giving me their T-shirts, their branded items, and I take pictures of people wearing their branded shirts, planting the trees and getting the story out, and they're happy. And you know what? Their customers are happy too, right? Carbon market people are going to carbon market people will wrinkle their nose at my model, and that's fair. But I ain't a carbon model. I'm just getting the trees planted. and hoping for the best, honestly.
Got it. And are there any questions that a business should ask before treating a reporting planting number as a meaningful environmental result?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, I would just say it's like keep it simple, right? Someone pays me for 1,000,000 trees, they're going to get 1,000,000 trees planted. And I'm going to say, this is where they went, right? This is what it was. And at that level, I fly over. If they want to fly over and check them out, sure, because they're kind of buying a story. There's a whole lot of trust going on here. I get it, right? Um, but again, I set expectations is that and these are going to be outplanted, and you can see them on Google Earth in 3 years when they're big enough to be spotted by Google Earth. But that's where they're going, right? That's the polygon area. Um, it's really sort of setting expectations. This is what you're going to get, and this is what's going on, and here's what I call the SFW. And I will work with your communications and PR team about what's the best thing to say. And just again, keep it simple, right? Keep it simple, and don't make all these big, grand and glorious claims that we're going to change the world and this and that. Just like, look, as they say, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time was today. And today we helped get 120,000 more trees into the pipeline. And here's the story. And we hope it helps.
And what evidence can Forest Planet provide to a company that funds a project? You've already mentioned satellite photographs, but does reporting typically include, let's say, planting records, locations, tree species, photographs, like, for example, those satellite ones, site visits you already mentioned, maybe survival assessments or other forms of verification?
So again, the verification, I'm looking into getting in country. If I'm going to work with one tree planting partner in that country, I want to work with a verification organization that's separate. That actually they kind of compete, if you will, leverage the distrust. But photos of me on site talking to the people, sure, video clips, um, satellites if possible. Um, and maybe a third party validation that yes, there were 1,000,000 trees here, and yes, they got planted. So that's going to be the next stage. That's a little more expensive. I got to figure out how to pay for all that. But again, if someone wants to give me 20 cents a tree or 25 cents a tree, pay more for that. So it's like, okay, your bare bones entry is 15 cents. If you want fries with that, it's going to be a little bit more, but I've got the guys to do it. Right. So it really depends on what kind of product you want and what your budget
And
is.
where do you think the reforestation sector still needs stronger or more consistent reporting standards?
I honestly don't know. I mean, that again, I'm not a forestry expert. You know, I know you've had other people on your show, and then that's a big deal. Focusing on that, they're more expertise than me. I'm just like a really kind of just an engineer. You just get it because here's a definition that works, and it might you tell me what's the difference between a scientist and an engineer, right? And the scientist comes up with great, amazing stuff that's really, really cool and does this stuff, right? And that's great. That's what scientists do. Engineers come in, take one look at that and say, okay, I'm going to take that concept, I'm going to tweak it, and I'm going to come up with something that does 80% of what the scientist did at 10% of the cost, right? That's how engineers think, right? So I'm an engineer in mind. The forests scientists are the scientists. And yes, they're going to come up with amazing tools and amazing procedures and processes. And I'm going to deliver maybe 80% of that at a fraction of the cost. That's in general how I kind of see what we do. And I don't claim to be a scientist at all, which is why I can't answer your last question.
Yes. And as you mentioned at the very beginning, if I understood correctly, you are not even looking at specific countries, whether this country or the other is better. You are simply looking at those programs. So then you're just validating the program's requirements, most probably, and how they are structured, right?
And track history. Yeah,
And the track history.
absolutely. Show me the trees. Show me what you've done. Show me your nursery. Um, Completely different model up in the mountains, where like in Tanzania, where in one hillside had been denuded, it had been encroached because there was a massive poverty and all this, and we need to address that. But that one mountainside was sitting right on top of a well, and the water levels were starting to drop pretty radically because what happened is that when during the rainy season there were no trees left to sort of grab the rainwater and cycle it down into the well, spongify the hill, so to speak. So we put back about 400,000 what they call water resource type trees. Some fruit, like loquat, does some have a fruit, but mostly they just grow straight and they grow fast to capture water. Um, I was only going to do that if I sat there with the village elder and his team of his council, if you will, and it was like, "Why'd you cut the trees down? And what's going to keep you from cutting it down again?" And they're like, "We got the memo. We messed up. You know, we've got other things. It was what we were trying to do or alleviate the poverty, but we realized that there was a short-term fix for a long-term, punch in the gut because your water supply is going down, right? And if the water goes away, then you've got 3,000 people who are relying on that instantly become refugees." So that was the first conversation. What's going on with the economics of the village that you can now sort of direct your efforts in other places where you're not going to encroach upon that hillside if we put them back. Um, and they satisfied that they got the memo and that ain't going to happen. And I hope it's not going to happen because we put 300,000 trees there that are growing great. They're growing beautiful. I mean, they were like I'm showing you like maybe 10-inch seedlings, but they just sent me a photo from a couple weeks ago, and the thing's like 8 feet tall, and that's 3 years later, and that's 8 feet worth of roots, and that's that much more water. I'm not a scientist. I don't know how much more water, but it's more, because rainy season does happen. Um, so that's for that. Um, like the coffee projects, there's farmers that want the coffee. Because that is a thing in the Usambara Mountains. We can outplant, 400,000 of those, but we also going to outplant shade trees and water resource trees in natural fencing to put up around what they call a living fence around because there's just open grazing and it's like goats going to wander in and out. That's just how the world is. And then it also, captures the water. So that's all going to be part of that analysis. And in Morocco, those are all fruiting trees where the agenda there is to, work with smallholder farmers who are right now using monocrops on their field, like corn or winter wheat. And corn yields are going down because of the heat and the drought. And they're a water hog. The nutrient density per hectare is not that great. They don't sequester carbon.
And they need to use more fertilizers, as we know, and the vicious circle
Yeah,
goes on and on.
inputs. So farmers who are not stupid, but they are conservative and they will stick with the devil they know. The agenda there is my partner has these amazing nurseries, there are like 10 of them, maybe all scattered all around the country. And those are all fruiting trees, like olive, like argon, which is amazing, like carob, like fig. And we'll just give the trees to the farmer, right? Um, So like in 10% of your, like a little corner, 10% of your land, we're going to give you a fig tree. It's 1 year old. It's healthy as hell. It looks great, but you need to take care of it for another 3 years before it starts to fruit, right? So you have to sink that cost. You have to make that investment, in just a corner. And they're like, okay, fine. So 3 years later, figs start happening. Okay, let me get another 1,000 trees. Uh, Now we'll get carob. Now we'll get argon. Now we'll get olive. Whatever. So they're diversifying. And then while the trees are growing, before they start the fruit, what they will do in the very short term, and this is where the carbon calculations are leaving maybe CO2 equivalents on the table. I think, I'm not sure, is where you can now intercrop. So between the trees, you can plant, root vegetables. You can plant uh, sweet potatoes or whatever is appropriate for that area. And you're now, because there's water there, because the tree roots are holding the water, and they're offering just a little bit of shade, but that's all it's needed, right? So now this farmer is what they call permaculture. He's constantly pulling something out of his land rather than one big crop for a year, hoping he'll get a yield and hoping that the market prices will support him throughout, the rest of the year, right? And the nutrient density, if you will, of that hectareage just went way up because you've got the figs, you've got the other ground crops, you got this, you got that, and his income goes up, right? He has zero incentive to cut down that tree for firewood. Absolutely zero, right? So that's where you're really working with the economics of the situation and finding the right thing. And that model works. I mean, I love that model, and there's no shortage of these smallholder farmers. I mean, I don't know how many. I looked it up. I mean, America, we got these big giant farms that go for 6, 8, 900 acres, but the vast majority of farmers in the world are smallholder. There may be like 10 or 15 acres, and it's just like they've got to squeeze that lemon for every drop of juice they can get out of it. And this is one way to do that. Oh, and by the way, it sequesters more carbon and cools the planet. But that's not why they're doing it. That's why people are giving.
Eventually also healthier, better quality food for society. That's also true. To be honest, as we are talking, I'm just realizing how many side benefits there are. I would never even think of before our conversation today.
And that's funny because what you call side benefits, I call the point.
Yes.
The benefits. Carbon is a side benefit.
Yes.
But it doesn't matter as long as we end up in the same place. It's all good. Yeah.
Now I would like to talk about corporate claims and the risk of greenwashing.
Yeah.
Companies sometimes describe tree planting as carbon neutralization, carbon offsetting, climate positive activity, or simply sustainability contribution. I also have heard that one. Those terms do not necessarily mean the same thing. If you could tell us what claims can a company responsibly make when it funds for reforestation through ForestPlanet, and what claims should it avoid unless the project has gone through a formal carbon credit methodology or verification process?
Okay, so a formal carbon credit thing, they've got to sort of check those boxes. Okay, that's not us, except it might be, but anyway, that's not us.
Maybe in the future.
Yeah, what I tell people as a marketer is the old KISS message: just keep it simple, stupid. Don't mention carbon. Don't mention it. Human beings you're predetermined, where we're pre-wired to just have a positive psychological, sociological, and physiologically positive response to just looking at a tree. It's baked into our psyche, right? Where say, hey, this year, we did an initiative and we planted 1 million trees. And this was the species, and this was the location, and these were the goals. Don't even use the word sustainability. Don't use carbon, right? It's just keep it simple, because you had, the expression, you had them at tree. And that kind of cuts across like the various impasses that we have in society. Like now, your one guest, Heaven Neal, the last one, she was talking about the political realities and not companies. Maybe I'll paraphrase, saying they don't want to look woke, right? And fair enough. And I think it's like a majority of the carbon credits were sold to companies who were anonymous, who did not register themselves as actually being customers of carbon credits. But if you stop and think about it, carbon is an invisible gas. There's no visual. So what you're doing is reducing the amount of something that's invisible. So it's a double no visual when it comes to marketing, right? and sort of getting your cred, if that's your agenda, right, as a corporate or organization. And this is why I usually want to talk to the, this is why I want to talk to the marketing company, because my background's in marketing. I had my own ad agency. You know, you want to brand differentiate, if that's really your agenda, and you've got the budget to do it, just focus on the trees and keep it simple. This is the trees that we planted in this location, and here's why. And here are the people that benefit. And don't make any carbon claims. It's like, maybe this will help offset our footprint to some degree. And the magic word there is help, right? It just helped do things. And that's true. And then shut up. Because most people don't understand carbon markets. Most people don't understand carbon credits. A lot of people distrust them and think it's a bunch of stuff. Why? It's talking about removing an invisible gas. It doubles. There's no visual on it. And I can say, listen, we planted this many trees, and the only comparison that's like 20 football fields. Okay, I can see a football field in my head.
Mhm.
So football field is 1,000 trees, and you did 20 of them. Thank you very much. Now, buy my water bottle because we planted 20 football fields worth of trees, right? It's a marketing thing, right? It's not the sustainability team. That's the conversation I have with them. Keep it simple.
And this is an important boundary, particularly as regulators and customers scrutinize environmental claims more closely. So saying less probably is the best advice. So thanks for that. It also raises the wider question of how reforestation should fit into a company's climate strategy. If you could tell us, how should businesses position tree planting alongside reductions in scope 1 to 3 emissions, that would be great. Or if it cannot be done at the moment, maybe in the future that would be possible.
I don't know about scope 1, 2, 3, and again, sustainability claims. I'm really kind of taking this as from the different angle here. And the net zero in the name of your podcast demonstrates where you're coming from, and that's fine. All right. Where I'm coming from is marketing. Like, if you're a brand and you want to differentiate your brand, just make a simple claim. It's not a sustainability claim. It's almost a marketing claim, right? And with marketing, you always keep it simple. Does that make sense?
And yes, but do you encounter, for instance, companies that view tree planting as a substitute for the more difficult work on reducing operational or, let's say, supply chain emissions? And how do you respond to that?
I really haven't gotten into that conversation with the brands just yet. I will. I mean, look, carbon markets are their own thing, right? And you know how complicated it can be. And I swear, I had so many conversations with people in the carbon markets, and they're kind of like, we spend 50% of our money on lawyers. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that, right? And I'm like, well, why don't you? If it depends on your agenda, why don't you? If you really want to just sort of look good, I mean, not like, if you've made net zero claims and you're publicly traded, then you have to deliver on those for regulatory reasons and all that kind of stuff. So for that, you got to do what you got to do. But if you're just trying to differentiate your brand in the mind of the consumers, again, marketing 101, keep it simple. Don't use sustainability, the word, and don't even use the word carbon. We just planted trees. And really kind of, focus in on that. Now, that doesn't preclude you from, decarbonizing your supply chain and all the other million projects that you have going on. That can be part of the sustainability team, right? That comes out of their budget, right? And we're going to put solar arrays on the parking lots and do this and do that and use lower emission concrete when we build this or that. I mean, there's a million things they can do. And all those are wonderful. And that's all great. And that's part of the sustainability team. Okay. What I'm saying is that put this over to the marketing team, right? Knowing that there's going to be sustainability benefits, of course, without the word sustainability, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Now let's turn to another frequent source of misunderstanding, which is cost. ForestPlanet has emphasized its ability to support planting at a very low average cost per tree. Some decision makers may see that as an evidence of efficiency, obviously, while others also may question whether such a low price can support quality planting and long-term outcomes. So, if you could explain what does the per tree figure actually cover? What does it not cover? And why can cost differ so widely between projects and planting models? Because I can probably understand why it differs country to country because of the local cost, but let's maybe explore those other angles.
That's the number one thing, is just the incongruencies between the economies. Okay. If you will, it's like economic arbitrage, or socioeconomic arbitrage, if you will. Just a dollar goes very, very far. It's on a different scale. For example, like in Tanzania, and I check, and this is like the average going rate. People working in the field all day long, they need 15,000 shillings cash at the end of the day. That's not bad money for them, okay? Because that's where that economy is. That's $6, right? Maybe a little bit less now. I haven't checked, right? So that's a reason. And most of your costs, your hard cost, when you're doing these types of things, is labor, right? But if your labor is frankly that cheap in the eyes of a Western, that's going to get the cost down, right? And then again, it's all setting expectations about what you're buying. Like getting a seed into a seed tube with the right soil and the right soil mix, depending on the species, because you have sand and you have mud and you have manure and you have clay and whatever, depending. And that's got to be the right mix. And that's just someone sitting there all day long in the mud, sort of doing all this and packing these tubes and getting the seeds in and arraying them properly in each bed and then marking each bed. That's hilariously efficient, right? Where do the seeds come from? Well, um, a lot of times, most of the time, it's from the surrounding forest. So in Tanzania, like on the coast, when we're planting mangroves, we send high school kids with buckets and say, okay, this is a red mangrove and this is a black mangrove and this is a white. And so they're outside, they're playing, they're doing a positive thing and they're learning. And they come back with a whole bucket full of seeds, like a whole freaking bucket full of seeds, right? And at the end of that day, they've been outside and they're very happy. And you give them maybe 2,000 shillings. That's 80 cents, right? So your per seed cost is effectively zero, right? So I mean, I'll have these economic discussions with everybody. I mean, how can you get it to 15 cents? Well, here's how. I'll just go down the cost component. I got nothing to hide. Put that in there, and then again, it's all about the design of the program. Now, if how much monitoring you want, if you want to visit, you can come anytime, right? Yourself. And I know I know the hotels to stay in. I know the planes and the local trail, the guy that'll pick you up and all that kind of stuff. So make a trip out of it. Why not? And show up. If you want your own credibility, then how do we know? Well, get out of your comfort zone and come with me to ankle deep mud in Tanzania and see your trees and get the
I'm
stories.
almost sold. I'm almost sold. I
Yeah,
would love to go there.
yeah, just do it. Just do it. I mean, the long haul flights are expensive, but the in-country costs are very, very low for the Western dollar, right? So that's what I kind of put it back on to them. And I'm like, if you want credibility, your CEO needs to be in the field, or your chief marketing officer, chief development officer, or somebody in the C-suites needs to be in that field talking to people and having that credible. That'll buy you all the credibility you get for cheap. For the cost of a round trip, it's $3,000, right? What's the value of that credibility? That could be worth millions. You spent a week, you spent a few $1,000, and you bought a whole lot of credibility. Come on with me. Come on with me. Check for yourself.
think that the breakdown should help put the headline price into context. Yet, the cost is only one dimension, as we know, and different ecosystems can create very different practical challenges. ForestPlanet has supported different types of planting, including, as you already mentioned, mangroves and projects connected with farming communities. If you could tell us how do the objectives and the risks differ between restoring mangroves, planting productive trees in agriculture areas, and restoring more conventional forest landscapes. That would be great.
They're different, but I mean, at the core, they're the same. Okay, at the core, they're the same. Show me the nursery, show me the economic plan, show me the economic benefit, show me the people who are going to do it. It's the same questions no matter what you're doing, right? And um, where the seeds are going to come from, and what are your costs and all that. And if again, they can all make sense, but it's like at their core, they're about 80% the same. It's just the last 20%. We went this way with mangroves, we went this way with fig trees in Morocco. You know what I mean? But the same questions at the core, at the base. I hope that's not I don't mean to dodge your question there, but
No, not at all.
yeah,
At least we are on the same page. And now I understand that those projects are run the same way. You're asking the same questions. Obviously, just the climate and people around are changing.
it really, I'm going to ask the same questions no matter if I'm in Iraq and they're planting figs or some species that I'm not even aware of that grows in Iraq. I'll ask the exact same questions. And again, you're looking for systems here, right? And in systems, again, I studied this in college, there's universals to systems. And it doesn't matter if it's, some species in Iraq or an argon tree in Morocco or something else. It's the same kind of concept. Maybe the names have changed, a little bit of nuance here and there, a little bit of specific details that you have to be mindful of course, because, it's not all completely cookie cutter, but I think at its core, they're equivalent challenges.
And what role do local land holders and communities play in determining whether those projects succeed over the long term?
Everything. I mean,
Okay.
whoever owns the
Well,
land, they have to be involved. They have to. I mean, what's the benefit to the landowner? And sometimes the landowner is the Forest Service or an individual or a community. That again. That's the first question: who owns the land and who benefits?
so in a nutshell, they are the key to success.
Always right.
Okay.
I mean, after that, kind of nature takes care of itself. Like there's nothing complicated, honestly. That's just the insane thing about this. I just got into this. This is that growing a tree in a nursery, there's nothing complicated about it. We figured this out. It's not hard. It's not new. I'm absolutely not pushing any boundaries here. It's really just making the proper connections between the people in the community and what's needed and businesses and brands who want to differentiate. Like, where does the Venn diagram overlap? Right. And I submit that where it all overlaps, that's ForestPlanet. That's our goal. That's our role.
So that illustrates why reforestation cannot be separated from local livelihoods, land use, and community incentives.
Absolutely.
And for our final main question, I would like to make this practical for companies considering action. So let's suppose a sustainability, procurement, or ESG team is evaluating a reforestation partner for the first time. If you could tell us what questions should they ask before committing funding, and what warning signs might indicate that the proposal is maybe focused more on marketing than on credible ecological and community outcomes.
The implication in that question is that marketing outcomes aren't credible, right? They can be just as credible because their dollar spends just as much, right? So, if I were the brand, I would, I'll put my brand hat on, and as I'll ask the same questions that I ask of myself: who benefits, and what are the natural forces behind making this thing success? What's the driver? And okay, we want to plant a whole bunch of this species in this one location. Okay, who's the land, and what are the benefits? Same questions I ask. Whatever brand is involved with this. I'm not sure what to tell you there, other than, businesses, should just, ask you the basic questions, who's behind it, and track history. Same question
And
I
where the
ask.
money goes.
Where does the
Exactly.
money go, and what have you done in the past, and who are your other customers, and are they happy? I mean, it's just basic supply side research. It's the same market research that they should do anytime when they buy computers, it's the same process. It should be no different.
And is there anything important, maybe any important points about reforestation, corporate participation on realities of keeping trees alive that we have not discussed that you think that will be interesting for our Net Zero Compare audience to understand?
I think you've done a good job at asking, sort of drilling down and getting to the point of all the questions. And I hope I've been responsive and not in giving you satisfying answers. I think we've touched on all of them, and I guess I just do want to reiterate that this is not it doesn't have to be as complicated as I see it in other places, and that's not necessarily a reproach, but it could be, because it really sort of depends on your agenda. You can have a whole lot of Western W-2s doing background history and validation and all this other kind of stuff, and that's all good, but it inflates the cost by 2 orders of magnitude. Is it worth it? So I'm not saying it is, or I'm not saying it isn't, but please ask that question. For ForestPlanet, we've made the assessment, it's not worth it. You don't get more trees, you get fewer trees, which is why we're a virtual organization. We have very few employees. We have very few W-2s that are Western W-2s. We try to do everything in the developing world where the dollar goes far. So that's hopefully that answers that question. But, yeah, I mean, do that cost benefit about analysis in your own mind. And then, how are you going to present it? And again, keep it simple. Just keep it simple.
Exactly. What you've said at the very beginning and then for our conversation is pretty straightforward and easy. It's just about planting the trees.
Yes, sir. I mean, again, there's this. I'm not going to name him or her or them that's in the carbon market, and they're getting ready to leave the carbon markets and say, I should just fundraise for you directly and just plant the frickin' trees. And I'm like, yes, please. Yes, please. I don't have a ton of margin, but there's enough in there. If we go for volume, then everybody eats and trees get planted and everybody's better. And we just bypass that whole machinery, the whole Megillah. We'll see if that happens.
Exactly.
I don't know. Keep it simple.
Hank, thank you very much for joining me today and for explaining both the potential and the limitations of reforestation in such practical terms.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been really enjoyable. You've been a great host.
Thank you. And for businesses and sustainability teams, the key lesson is that credible tree planting requires more than funding, a target number of seedlings, project selection, local participation, suitable species, monitoring survival, transparent reporting, and careful environmental claims all matter.
Yes, sir.
And listeners and readers can learn more about Hank's work and ForestPlanet's current projects at forestplanet.org. You can find more conversations and practical sustainability insights from Net Zero Compare at netzerocompare.com, as well as on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. You can also subscribe to our newsletter for free for future interviews, articles, and sustainability updates. Thank you, everyone, for listening to the Net Zero Compare podcast.